Howdy friends, it's your boy Wu-Tang PS1 Controller, and we're back for another volume of obscure and forgotten PS1 games. Volume number 11 to be exact, which means the wheel is back from its extended vacation and we're back to our regular tried and tested format. 3 games chosen completely at random from our curated list, and 1 bonus game which is chosen by you, the lovely viewer. And hey, since the regular wheel is back in action, you know that means quality control is once again out the window. So, will we discover some forgotten classics, or will another PAL exclusive rise up from the depths of 50Hz hell? There's only one way to find out, so sit back, relax, and put your feet up, because the wheel is back, and you better believe it will provide.
The wheel will provide.
Kicking things off today, we have Black Dawn, which first made its way to North America in October of 1996 before later seeing a Japanese and PAL release the following year. Black Dawn is one of the PlayStation's many helicopter titles, a subgenre of flight games that I honestly haven't delved into too much, despite really enjoying the old jet and space variants of the genre. I often associate helicopter games with one word: difficult. Not only are helicopters a little more difficult to control in a 3D space compared to other flying vehicles, and in real life probably, but even in the games where they're quite easy to control, the difficulty still tends to be off the charts more often than not. You can tank both Soviet Strike and Jungle Strike for that perception, and probably also G-Police as well. I know the Crafts and G-Police aren't technically helicopters, but come on, it's a helicopter game. So this brings us to Black Dawn, one of the earliest helicopter games on the console. Now, I'll be honest, prior to booting this thing up, my expectations for this weren't very high. Not only are we going into a pretty early release on the console, but considering that I've heard practically nothing about this game, ever, I was preparing for a pretty bland throwaway experience, but thankfully that feeling went away within seconds of starting the game, because the logo for a development team called Black Ops Entertainment appeared. Now, you may or may not know much about Black Ops Entertainment, but if you go through their history of games, you'll see one of the most eclectic lists around. They worked on licensed games like the Jurassic Park fighting game Warpath, Tomorrow Never Dies, and The World Is Not Enough on the PS1, the cool X-Files survival horror title on the PS2, Resist or Serve, a bunch of the Knockout Kings games, that insane PS2 FPS where you hunt down Osama bin Laden, America's 10 Most Wanted, but most importantly of all, they were behind the excellent Treasures of the Deep, one of the PS1's best deep cuts. So in the space of the startup sequence, we've gone from possible generic bland helicopter game to potential banger. Also, I really enjoy the old Virgin Interactive opening, so that was great to see again.
Nice.
Now, of course, to actually get a proper feel for the game, we should probably play it, so let's try that. Now, the plot in this game is a little loosey-goosey. The gist is that you're a helicopter ace that's being recruited to a Black Ops counter-terrorism force, and each of the missions in-game is its own isolated thing rather than being part of an overarching story. So, long story short, here's a bunch of terrorists and here's your helicopter. Go blow them up. Sound good? Okay, good. Now, as a game, Black Dawn tries to offer a mixture of arcade and simulation style action. Now, what I mean by that is that the gameplay elements are all very arcadey. We've got health bars, power-ups, tons and tons of points to earn, all that good stuff. But when it comes to controlling the helicopter itself, this is where things get a little trickier. Pretty much every single button on the controller is used for controlling this thing. In fact, there aren't even enough buttons, as many of your commands require you to press 2 buttons simultaneously for functions like changing your altitude, weapons, and your view. Obviously, with games like the Strike series, you could keep things relatively simple because the game is played from a top-down perspective. But in Black Dawn, we're moving into the realms of full 3D movement and environments, and helicopters have some pretty wacky movements, so Black Ops opting to go for a more true-to-life simulation-style control system on a console is a pretty ballsy move, really. The game does offer up a variety of different control methods, but I'd say all of them are gonna take some time to learn. Even the default setup, which is just called arcade, is gonna test your controller dexterity, let me tell you. Now, naturally, I studied all this up before I got into the game, but the load screen does recap the controls before a mission, which is handy too. But as we all know, the best way to learn is just to try things out. So, I went into the first mission to get my bearings, and pretty much immediately had my ass handed to me. Not only is this game really hard to just pick up and play, but it's also incredibly difficult in general. Your health can go from full to empty in the blink of an eye, and these levels are packed with enemies, both in the air and on the ground, so if you go flying around willy-nilly, you'll be in the dirt in no time. Now, I managed to power through the first level and get a better grasp of the controls eventually, but I knew I was going to be in for a rough time with this one, so I did 2 things. I took a little break, came back to it a day later, and then immediately dropped the difficulty from normal down to easy. Sissy. Yeah, this is one of those games with 90s difficulty options. Easy makes fun of you and hard is rockin', I guess. Now, I want to clarify, easy mode in this game is still very difficult, but if you want to learn how to play this game an easier way into it, start on easy, trust me. Now, when I started on the second level, things were still pretty tough, but I didn't feel as overwhelmed this time. I was starting to pick up the nuances of the controls, I could navigate around the map a lot better, and even dodge incoming fire. Everything was starting to come together. Now, the way the levels in this game are structured is actually quite similar to the Strike series. You're put into a large map from a safe starting zone and then given an objective to complete. This objective could be destroying some air or ground targets, you might need to evacuate or drop off some personnel, collect a few items, or protect some allies from attack. Once you complete your first objective on the map, you'll then be given another objective, and you basically do this on repeat 3 to 5 times until the mission ends, and then you can move on to the next map. Now, I've always quite liked this style in other games, the idea of moving from one objective to another on a large map rather than just smaller individual levels. It makes it feel more like a full military operation. Not only are we getting Navy SEALs out of a mission once they completed their objective, but you were also the ones who dropped them off in the first place. You just ended up destroying a few snowmobiles in between to pass the time. Now, what adds to the difficulty of these missions is that you've got to complete all the level's objectives in a single run. You can beat 4 out of 5 objectives, but then get blown up by a rogue SAM site, and if so, you're back to the very beginning of the level. And these levels on your first run should probably take you about 10 to 15 minutes on average, so make sure to keep an eye on your fuel, your health, your radar. Basically, you should just be on edge all the time. Now, a big part of doing well in this game is actually understanding how to take advantage of items and your weapons. Truthfully, your attack chopper is actually very overpowered. You're just kind of a glass cannon, really. You have access to a machine gun, rockets, missiles, firebombs, and even nukes if you're lucky enough to find them, and they are as satisfying as you would hope, by the way. Every item outside of your machine gun is limited, but killing enemies often drops more ammo, and if you are lucky, sometimes they will even drop upgrades for your weapons. Each weapon outside of the nuke can be upgraded 3 times. Blue is the lowest, red is the next step, and finally yellow is the highest level. If you can upgrade your weapons, you will literally become a terror in the sky, flying by enemies and taking them out with a missile barrage, or sniping crack houses from afar with your machine gun. Also, one of the levels in this game is you taking out drug dealers in Hollywood. It's kinda wild. Now, fodder enemies aren't just important for keeping your weapons stocked up, they also often drop health and fuel pickups. So if something does go wrong during a mission, back up out of there, kill some fodder enemies, and then return once your chopper is in better shape. Now, once I put all these pieces together, the chopper controls, the strengths and weaknesses of my arsenal, and the way to manage fodder enemies to keep my chopper nice and healthy, the game went from being overwhelmingly difficult to a surprisingly tense and enjoyable action game. Now, there are only 7 missions in total, but each one does take you to a new environment across the globe, whether you're taking out Hezbollah in Central Park or the Tamil Tigers in the Senwar Islands. The game offers a mixture of fact and fiction with real organizations in some absolutely ludicrous over-the-top situations. Seriously, that crack house mission in LA with the ATF, it is something else. Also, would you look at that? A little Treasures of the Deep Easter egg. You love to see it. Now, the presentation of this game, as you can probably see, is a bit of a mixed bag. I will say the models and environments look good enough for a 1996 release. There is a ton of variety across the various vehicles and structures, and I also kinda love the humans in this game, especially the Navy SEALs on skis. Look at them go. Overall, I think it's a decent looking game for 96. It's nothing spectacular, but it does have that early 3D charm for sure. Of course, it's also got a healthy dose of early 3D draw distance as well, and I would say the fog and field of vision is a little bit worse than the average, but not to the extent where it negatively affected my ability to enjoy the game. Sure, there are parts where enemies can appear out of the fog or buildings just shoot into view, but there was never a time that I felt I was being attacked by something I couldn't see or didn't have time to react to, so it is perfectly acceptable in my book. On the performance side, things are stable for the most part, aiming to hit around 30 FPS, but you can expect some very noticeable slowdown once the action on screen gets a bit more hectic, but if anything, I found the slowdown to actually help me out in some of the fights, so yeah, it could be worse. The game also has some top tier 90s jank cutscenes. Now, these are very short and are only given to you if you beat a level on normal difficulty or higher, but look at the state of these things. They'd actually make you want to put up with the higher difficulty. But seriously though, some of these do legit last about 2 seconds, so don't feel too bad if you miss out on them. Now, when it comes to audio, this is where Black Dawn really begins to shine in my opinion. Of course, you can expect the usual pre and mid-mission briefings, which are on par with other military games of the era.
Yesterday, federal ATF agents and LAPD were given the green light to conduct Operation Crackdown, a massive new campaign against gang drug trafficking and small arms dealing.
The sound effects are heavy hitting and provide a lot of impact, especially the upgraded machine guns, but above all else, the music during the missions is really some top-notch stuff. Really high quality, almost movie level compositions, and if these things hit at the right time during a big fight, it can completely make you forget about the blocky graphics. You're right there in the battle, fighting for your life.
Incoming missiles!
Plus, it also has a few tracks with steel drums that remind me immediately of the movie Commando, and honestly, anything that reminds me of Commando is a win in my book, so there you go.
SEAL spotted!
So, all in all, Black Dawn ended up being a rather pleasant surprise really. Don't get me wrong, this is still clearly an early 3D attempt at the genre, and the difficulty is going to turn a lot of people off. But if you can learn its controls and gameplay nuances, Black Dawn actually holds up remarkably well in my opinion. It's not the longest game in the world, but it is 7 missions of high octane action with some cool weapons, varied objectives, and a badass soundtrack. It's quite literally about all you could want and hope for from a 3D helicopter game from 1996, and if that sounds like your thing, well then no doubt you're probably really gonna enjoy this title. Not only that, it even has some cool bonuses like a 2-player deathmatch mode which is only accessible by cheat code. Man, I really do miss the days of obtuse unlockable content. And also, if you beat the game on hard mode, you get a cool behind the scenes look at Black Ops Entertainment, which I'm gonna show to you now to round out this segment because I don't think it is anywhere on the internet, so yeah, enjoy.
The wheel will provide.
Ladies and gentlemen, up next we got Cheesy, coming to us in November of the year 1996 in PAL regions before seeing a Japanese release in the summer of 1997. Now look, there's probably a lot to say about the box art for this game. It's simultaneously really well made and also very creepy, but more importantly, check out the Japanese box art for this game. Now this is art. Alrighty, who's ready for another European platformer? I know we all had fun in the last volume with Johnny Bazooka Tone and his sex guitar, but this time we're playing as a mouse that's being locked in the castle of an evil scientist, only the scientist castle has also just been invaded by aliens, so I guess we're going to use the commotion caused by this very odd situation to get out of here. Now, a little backstory. Cheesy is the product of a dev team called CTA Developments, who are probably most well known for their work on the Amiga with games like Sleepwalker, and also that Super Nintendo game based on Eek the Cat. Remember Eek the Cat? Yeah, well that game is actually just a reskin of Sleepwalker, so yeah, everything is Sleepwalker basically. I'll tell you what's not Sleepwalker though. Cheesy, CTA Development's first PS1 game, and also their last game as a studio. That probably doesn't bode well for us, does it? Now, interestingly, Cheesy here was originally announced as an Atari Jaguar game, with a planned release date in the winter of 1995. Of course, by that time, the Atari Jaguar was already in the mud, so development quickly swapped over to the much more powerful PlayStation 1, and even though Cheesy was originally intended to be a 2.5D platformer, the swap to Sony's little grey box inspired the developers to make use of this extra power and add some fully 3D segments into the game as well. So Cheesy went from being a 2.5D platformer to a hybrid platformer of sorts, and today we're gonna see how all that turned out. Now I'm sure you can kind of already tell just by looking at it, but we might as well dig in and give the game a fair chance. Now first things first, I do want you to remember that this game was made in the very early days of 3D games development. Not only had we yet to really establish consistent 3D platformer design, but this was also the developer's first ever 3D game, and this becomes very apparent as soon as you take control. Now, I'm sure I've used the term momentum on the channel before, the act of continuous movement once something gets in motion. Now, let me tell you, no character in the history of video games has momentum like Cheesy does. Not Mario, not Sonic the Hedgehog, not even the Marble from Marble Madness. This little dude could probably run for days after you get him going, but thankfully the relatively small area that he exists in prevents that from ever happening. Also, it is tank controls, by the way, why wouldn't it be? Now, the good news is that these 3D sections are actually only used as a hub world of sorts just to enter into levels. You'll never actually have to do any real platforming while using these controls, outside of hopping up on a box or falling down a hole, I guess. Really, it feels like this whole part was just added in here as a way to experiment with 3D movement, and while it's certainly not good, at all, you will rarely ever be dealing with it, and the other parts of the game do control a little better at least. Now, once you're out of the hub world, we move on to the real cheesy, these 2.5D sections, which is where the majority of the game will take place. Now, the switch from 3D to 2D movement is significantly better. It's still not very good, mind you, but it is significantly better. Cheesy still has momentum in these sections, but it is toned down quite a bit, and to my surprise, I never found that it really impacted my ability to platform in this game. Even the most narrow and precise of jumps were kind of easy to make, mostly thanks to there being a degree of air control with the character. It's certainly a little odd, but if you kind of allow your brain to accept that this doesn't have the movement of a traditional platformer, then honestly, I have played worse controlling games than this. It is certainly not great, it's not even good, but it's also not terrible either. So what do you do in Cheesy? Well, you jump and you shoot. Jump on some platforms, jump on some enemies, dodge some hazards, all that good stuff. Early on into the game though, Cheesy will also get a gun grafted onto his arm. I guess we could question this, but once again, video games, don't worry about it. Shooting in this game is pretty straightforward. You have infinite ammo and can shoot horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. Although weirdly, you can't move while you shoot, and shooting also slows down your character's momentum a bit if you are already in motion. So you can kind of use shooting as a break if you like. Now, thankfully, you can shoot while jumping, and that has no effect on your momentum. So long story short, just keep jumping and shooting. It's almost like your Mega Man in ugly yellow mouse form. Now, when it comes to collectibles, we've got a grand total of 3. Cheese, hearts, and extra lives. Hearts and lives are pretty self-explanatory. Each heart represents a hit point. Lose all your hit points and then you drop a life. Now, you may think collecting 100 pieces of cheese gets you an extra life, but what it actually does is give you an extra continue. So 100 pieces of cheese is technically 5 lives, a decent cheese to life exchange rate in my opinion. And I suppose other than the odd mid-level checkpoint and a point system that exists, I guess, that sums up the majority of what Cheesy has to offer. Now, in case you're wondering what our goal is, basically once you get the gun grafted onto our arm, we come across a spell book with a teleportation spell that can get us out of this castle, and the rest of the game is hunting down various ingredients to cast said spell. Each ingredient is conveniently behind a new level. Hop into the level in the hub world, run through the various segments, beat the boss at the end, rinse and repeat. Now, like I said, the majority of these levels will be taken up by these 2.5D segments, but that's not all Cheesy has up his sleeve. We've got some gimmick stages as well, including top-down shooter levels, a level where you surf through the sewers, parts where you've got to dodge stuff on a UFO, a level where you move through test tubes, and even goddamn minecart levels. I just can't escape these things, can I? Of course, there's also some boss fights to mix things up, like a spider fight where you're both bunging off some web, the teapot fight which takes place in a 3D area, or the final boss, which is actually a fucking nightmare to beat, to be honest. What the hell is going on here? Cheesy has all the little sprinkles of variety and gimmicks that you would expect from a 3D platformer of the era. It's just that the best stuff in this game is functional yet mediocre, and the worst stuff is broken and incredibly frustrating. Cheesy, if I'm being kind, is playable. It's playable, but never have I played a full price retail release that looks and feels this much like a Net Your Rosie game. Surprisingly, I'd say the controls and the movement are actually the least of this game's issues. I found most segments and minigames actually controlled just fine once you got the hang of it. Most of the game's issues actually just come from how bland, repetitive, and poorly designed a lot of it is. The 2.5D levels feature a ton of blind jumps, mindlessly repetitive sections, very little challenge, and really outside of a level where a dragon chases you, or some fire chases you, or a UFO chases you, it is altogether some of the dullest platforming and shooting you will find on the console. The minigames are mostly variants of pressing left or right at the correct time. The top-down segments, which do control better than the whole world at least, have really inconsistent aiming and are kind of just over in a flash. And speaking of being over in a flash, all the bosses outside of the final boss can be beaten in about 10 or 20 seconds with very little effort. I didn't even know the spider boss battle was a boss battle before it had finished. It just kind of appeared and was gone. But really, both the best and worst thing about Cheesy lies in its presentation. On the bad side, we have the visuals, which have to be some of the blandest and visually uninteresting environments that I've ever seen in a PS1 game. I gave Small Soldier shit for being brown, but Cheesy is the king of brown environments, and not just brown, really ugly brown too. And these environments, you're not just going to see them once, they will repeat throughout the game as well. Most of these places you will see 2 or 3 times throughout your playthrough in different variants. The odd time the game does give you a bit of colour, it is like a gift from above, but even then, the game just does not look good at all. But hey, at least the performance is stable. That's nice. On the other hand though, once again a European platformer brings the goods in the music department. Cheesy certainly isn't gonna win any awards for its soundtrack, but in terms of quality, it stands head and shoulders above everything else in the game. Decent platformer music at the very least, and mostly fitting for the levels at hand, except for the oddly happy theme when you're being chased by fire. Well, that's Cheesy. Is it the worst platformer I've played on the console? Probably not. Don't get me wrong, it's certainly not good, but at the same time, I also didn't really mind playing it from start to finish. Like, there's a ton wrong with this game, but if you got this when you were a kid back in '96, you probably could have played through the whole thing and been like, yeah, that was a game. I think looking back at it in retrospect, it's aged way worse than most PS1 games. It is clearly somebody's first attempt at a 3D game, but truthfully, I played so much worse than this on computers and older consoles, hell, even the PS1, and Cheesy, when all is said and done, isn't an abomination. It's not a low effort cash grab, it's just an ugly janky ass game with weird movement about a mouse trapped in a castle from the early days of 3D gaming, when people didn't know what the fuck they were doing. Does that mean you should play it? Absolutely not, but they did manage to make better minecart sections than Lucky Luke, so that should be applauded at least.
wheel will provide.
Kicking off the second half of Volume 11, we got Gekido Urban Fighters, first making its way to the PlayStation in April of the year 2000 in PAL regions, before seeing a North American release in June of the very same year. Now, longtime watchers of the channel might remember a very brief appearance from Gekido all the way back in Volume 2 of this series. You see, the developer of this game, an Italian studio by the name of Naps Team, also made Hotshot, the Phoenix Games published pile of trash, and without a doubt, the single worst game I have come across in these videos so far. This is why you can't trust worst PS1 games lists, because people are out here claiming Bubsy 3D is the worst thing on the console when they don't even know games like Hotshot and the Raven Project even exist. Come on. Get some culture, people. Now, due to our experience with Hotshot, you may think that this spells bad things in our future when it comes to today's game, Gekido, a side-scrolling beat-em-up exclusive to the PlayStation. Well, good news everybody, this game couldn't be further apart from Hotshots and the rest of Naps Team's Phoenix Games output if it tried. If anything, I like to think that they made all those cheap games so they could fund games like this, a wacky OTT beat-em-up that aims to bring you classic gameplay from those arcade and 16-bit titles you all know and love, with the enhancements, refinements, and sheer extraness that you'd see from some of Sega's latter titles like Die Hard Arcade and Dynamite Cop. But the question remains, can this late release PS1 beat 'em up hold a candle to the classics or even its contemporaries on the platform? Well, let's find out. Now, first things first, let's cover what little story we got. As always, there has to be some sort of motivation for beating up hundreds upon hundreds of goons, and in Gekido's case, it's the old classic, a lady has been kidnapped. A lady by the name of Angela, and it looks like the Kintaro gang of New Tokyo are responsible, and word on the street is that they may have also made a deal with the devil. So, it's up to a detective named Travis, an ex-soldier named Michelle, a martial artist named Tetsuo, and a token big man named Ushi to rescue her. And there you go, that's the reason why we're fighting robots in hand-to-hand combat. If that's not a good enough plot for you, well then I don't know what to say. Now, to get all this story, you are going to have to read the manual, although the game is nice enough to give us a little opening cutscene, where it straight up looks like you're fighting the devil, so consider me sufficiently hyped. Now, once you get into the game, you've got the choice of picking from one of 4 playable characters, and good news, 2-player co-op is here as well. So if I had someone to play with me, this is the part where I'd show you that. Unfortunately, I am still in the process of teaching my cats how to play video games, so we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. Now, as far as 3D beat-em-ups go, Gekido is very much a throwback to the classics like Double Dragon, Final Fight, and Streets of Rage. Even though the game is fully in 3D, the action plays out more like a classic belt scroller. The name of the game is walking to the right. If there's people in your way while you're doing that, beat them up and then walk to the right some more. Maybe you'll even need to walk to the left on occasion, but 99% of the time, just keep walking to the right and you're good. You'll of course come across goons of various shapes and sizes, your standard grunts, your big boys, your lanky boys, your cops, soldiers, guys in suits with guns, all that good stuff. You can pick up various weapons off the ground like knives and pipes, throw various boxes and barrels, equip a few guns here and there, and of course there's the genre classic, a roast cooked chicken fresh from the ground to restore your health. Gekido is very much a game that knows its audience. This is a classic beat 'em up from yesteryear, but now in 3D, and considering how popular the genre was back in the 16-bit era, it's a genre that sadly didn't see much love or attention during this generation of consoles. Now of course, even though Gekido is very much a throwback to the classics, it does bring some enhancements and 32-bit flair to the games that it is paying homage to. Most notably, with Gekido's rather deep and expansive list of moves and combos. Now don't get me wrong, we ain't looking at a full fighting games moves list or anything like that, but by beat 'em up standards, all 4 of Gekido's fighters have a vast list of moves to choose from. You've got 3 attack buttons, one for light punches, one for heavy punches, and another for kicks. You can grab by pressing 2 of these buttons together, just like in a fighting game. The shoulder buttons are used for jumping, crouching, and also locking onto enemies. And then there's wipeout and rage mode. As you take and deal damage, you fill up your wipeout and rage meter, denoted here on the screen. Rage can be activated by pressing the circle button, and depending on the level of the meter, you can unleash a special combo, give yourself a damage buff, or at max meter, grant yourself invincibility and hyper damage for a brief moment. The wipeout meter, which is above, does fill up similarly to the rage meter and allows you to unleash an AoE move by pressing all the shoulder buttons simultaneously. Now you can use this move whenever you want without a full meter, but doing so does drain some of your life. Better yet, if you activate your wipeout move while in rage mode, you can unleash an even more powerful version of the same move, but at the cost of ending your rage mode early. Of course, if you time this right, you can get the best of both worlds, so it does pay to be attentive when using these. Now of course, if you like, you can just work your way through the game using some simple 3-button punch and kick combos, but if you like some more skill to your beat 'em up, there's also some long ass flashy combo strings to pull off too, many of which utilizing a lot of the buttons on your controller. So even though I would say Gekido is easy to pick up and play, the game does clearly offer a little more technical depth than the average beat 'em up, which makes it especially rewarding for those looking to invest a little more time into the game's roster of characters. And speaking of characters, why don't we take a little look at the 4 on offer. First up, we got Travis, the all-rounder, a good choice for beginners with some simple and powerful combos. Next up, we have Michelle, who's got some strong kick attacks and some powerful throws thanks to her military training. Tetsuo, the martial artist, who is by far the quickest and most technically exciting fighter in the game, even though his moves do lack the damage that the rest of the roster has. And finally, there's Ushi, which I think is the Japanese word for cow, by the way. Well, needless to say, this guy deals big damage, especially with throws. And he can also lift cars too, which comes in handy. Overall, it's a very safe roster of characters from a beat 'em up, but all the archetypes are covered and each one does fit their role well. And since each character has their own unique combo list, there's some nice replayability here if you want to become proficient with each. And speaking of replayability, depending on which character you pick, the game can start from additional locations as well. Picking Travis or Michelle will start you in a level exclusive to them in the streets, while choosing Tetsuo or Ushi gives you an exclusive level in an abandoned ship. All characters will eventually converge to the same path as the game moves on, but it's nice that the game changes things up if you want to start a new playthrough. As for the levels themselves, well, you'll fight across 7 of the fiercest environments New Tokyo has to offer. We've got streets, villages, the subway, bridges, train stations, evil lair. Okay, so maybe the environments are a little derivative of the classic fighting in the streets brawler, but hey, at least they're done relatively well for the most part. I'll tell you what isn't derivative though, the boss battles. Without a doubt, the highlight of Gekido for me is the wacky bosses the game is going to put you up against. We've already mentioned the robots, but you're going to be fighting lightning turtles, psychic dudes, Homer Simpson, guys on fire exploding out of helicopters, and even Donkey Kong.
All the stars are here!
It's true.
This is where I think Gekido matches up with some of Sega's offerings of the era, because when I think of 3D beat 'em ups, it's often the wacky stuff that defines this era for me. Fighting an octopus and dynamite cop, pretty much all of Zombies Revenge. This is the natural evolution of beat 'em ups for me, just weird shit, and I'm glad to see Nap's team embrace this here where they could. Now look, there is absolutely a lot to like in Gekido, but it is still not a game without its issues, and I think the major one for me, and one that will likely affect most people, is just how brutally difficult this game is. Now, beat 'em ups are often quite tough. The genre originates from the arcade after all, where the goal is to get as much money from you as possible, and that difficulty also extends to the home with Gekido. Sure, you have ways to cheese enemies and exploit some dumbass AI, but for the most part the enemies in this game are plentiful and relentless. They will knock you down, steal your weapons, block all your attacks, and do it all over again ad nauseum. Now look, I am used to a difficult beat 'em up, right? I mean, we've all had our ass handed to us by a Bobo from time to time. That's just video games, you know? But what makes this game so tough is just how stingy it is on continues. You've got a total of 3 to make it through the game, which are of course shared by you and your partner in co-op, by the way. You get 3 lives per continue, and let me tell you, if you are not good at this game, those lives will go quick. If you're lucky, you may find the odd extra life here and there, and if you're very good, you can even earn a few more by upping your score. But even then, this game is still very tough to beat. In fact, it's almost mandatory to use a weird tactic that's never really explained, where if you pick up enemies just before they die, they can sometimes drop items, and a lot of these items were the difference between me seeing the end of the game or not. And the last level in particular is a relentless rush of tough enemies. If you are even lucky enough to make it to the final boss, which is Angela the kidnapped girl, by the way. Yeah, I don't know how that happened. Video games, don't worry about it, etc. Angela, being the final boss of a beat 'em up in classic style, will eviscerate you. I lost all my lives here every single time I got to this fight, by the way. Yes, I haven't beaten this game. I'm trash, I know. Now, unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any way to earn or change the amount of continues that you can get in this game, so you're gonna have to learn to adapt to the odd bit of bullshit and cheap moments like the motorbike goons, the tsunami, or most of the late game enemies, to be honest. But a big part of the difficulty also comes down to the fighting system itself. It is deep and a lot of fun, but it also doesn't feel refined enough for how tricky this game can get. I feel like doing well in this game will rely more on you using cheap tactics rather than learning and mastering big cool combo strings. But hey, that's just how it is sometimes. Now, this is a shame in particular because this game has a lot of unlockable content that I just can't show you. 4 extra playable characters, additional modes that make the game even harder somehow, and also some cool 2-player modes as well. Gekido is the premier content-filled beat 'em up on the console. Now that is a stone cold fact. What I can show you at least is the included arena battle mode for up to 4 players. Once again, a nice throwback to the likes of Streets of Rage 2 with its versus mode. Now, this could very much be seen as a throwaway mode, but considering the amount of characters and the deep list of combos for each, I could see this keeping you entertained for a few hours at least. It is surprisingly good shit. Now lastly, we gotta talk about the most important part of this game, the presentation. Now, looks wise, I'd say Gekido is a rather pretty game. It is a little rough around the edges for sure. There is a lot of clipping, some rough backgrounds and 3D elements here and there, but I think it does well to bring that arcade experience to your home. It looks like a game you can imagine seeing in arcades during the 90s. The character designs are nice, the moves are flashy, the fancy scream when you kill a boss with a combo is awesome, and of course, the bosses. Mwah! Not to mention the performance is really good too, keeping it at a consistent 30 FPS for the majority of the game, with only the odd drop here and there. All in all,
lovely stuff.
Now, just a note on the performance of this game. To clarify, we are using the North American version, right? Now, I played this game as a kid in little old Ireland, and out of curiosity, I went back to try the PAL version too, and there's some notable differences between them. For one, a part of me felt that the American version of this game is not just a bit harder, but it also runs a little fast, I guess you could say. Now look, I'm no fool, I'm well aware PAL games run slower than their NTSC counterparts due to the 50Hz and 60Hz standards at the time, but Gekido might be one of those games where the PAL version actually feels like the intended speed of the game. Now this might be down to personal preference, but the 25 frame per second PAL version felt about right for the combos and the game speed, and on the NTSC version, it all felt a little bit more hectic, almost like the game was sped up somewhat. Now, since the PAL version came out a few months before the NTSC version, it could be a case where the game just wasn't tuned or balanced properly for North America. I don't know, maybe I'm just talking out my ass, but this is the first time that I genuinely think the speed just felt a bit off in this version. But hey, Have a look at the two of them side by side and see what you think. Now, I just want to state that I'm not saying the North American version is unplayable or bad or anything, just a bit more hectic, I guess you could say. Although I'll tell you one other interesting difference between the PAL and North American versions, the soundtrack. So Gekido has a licensed soundtrack, and not just any licensed soundtrack. The game has Fatboy Slim playing during its levels. So yeah, this alone kind of makes Gekido worth playing. And also, I am going to take the hit for copyright in this video because I truly believe if a game has licensed music that is so integral to the experience, it should be shown in a YouTube video about that game. Like seriously, fuck ad revenue. I wouldn't want to talk about Tony Hawk or Burnout 3 without playing some of the tunes from the game, you know? Now the two Fatboy Slim tracks are in both versions of the game. In the PAL version, the remaining two tracks are two unlicensed tracks exclusive to this game, which are good, but nothing special really. But in the North American version, these tracks have been replaced with more licensed music, only this time it's nu metal from a band called Apartment 26. Now, I've never heard of this band prior to playing this game, but this music is so of the era and the kind of stuff that I would have jammed out to in my bedroom when I was an edgy teenager. Just check it out. So yeah, between edgy nu metal and Fatboy Slim, it is safe to say the North American version of Gekido has the soundtrack. I suppose if you can't get in Yuzo Koshiro to do the music for your beat 'em up, you might as well license some bangers, you know? Well, that was Gekido, and even though it's got some flaws and probably doesn't hold up as well as some of Sega's 3D brawlers from the era, I'd say this is still probably one of, if not the best beat 'em up available on the console. It has everything you'd want from a game in the genre, tons of action, a diverse range of enemies, some crazy bosses, plenty of characters, and unlockables for days. Throw in some co-op, the 4-player arena fighting mode, and the perfect 2000s era soundtrack, and there you go. We've got a banger on our hands. If you're a fan of the genre or just in the mood for a nice arcadey throwback, well, you really can't go wrong with this one. Either way, it's certainly quite the turnaround from Hot Shots. I think you'll agree.
you will provide.
Hyperspace catapult launcher ready. All personnel except catapult crew must exit the deck immediately. Repeat. All personnel except catapult crew must
First Lieutenant Lester, please board the Omega Boost.
Wetware is online, C-scan background is nominal, systems 367 and data Foxtrot jacked in. Okay, your hat.
Want a souvenir?
Marilyn's autograph. Got visual.
Coming through. But I'm going in a year before her first picture.
Then I'll take a Norma G.
Launch standby.
Roger that.
I'm not picky.
You're a prince.
Hey man, did you pack extra socks?
Yeah, and the family Christmas picture. Control, Mega Boost is ready to walk this bad dog.
Artificial intelligence. The enemy has already activated the time shaft. Your mission is to prevent the Alpha Core from causing historical alteration.
Rounding out Volume 11 and our viewer's choice for this volume, it's Omega Boost, which made its way to the PlayStation in April of 1999 in Japan before seeing a Western release in September of the very same year. This game was chosen for the wheel by a friend of the channel, Chris from Mako Powered Gaming, and in case you're wondering if this is a fix, the wheel doesn't take bribes, trust me, I've tried. I had to play Tunguska after all, lest ye forget. So, for those unaware, Omega Boost is the product of a little studio by the name of Polyphony Digital. They're mostly known for racing games. There's the fun cartoon one with the bouncy cars, and there's that other one that features lots of bossa nova and lounge jazz. I'm sure it's pretty good. Well, Omega Boost is to this very date the only non-racing game the studio has ever put out, and for many, I'm sure the prospect of a mech rail shooter from the team behind Gran Turismo is pretty appealing. And not just that, but the project lead for this game worked on the Panzer Dragoon series, so we've got ourselves kind of a dream team here. People who know the console and its technical capabilities inside and out, and also people who know how to make a good rail shooter. But in the end, how did it all turn out? Well, we're about to find out, aren't we? Now, first off, I'd just like to highlight the game's opening, which for my money is up there with the likes of Soul Blade, Chrono Cross, and Ridge Racer Type 4 as one of the best openings on the console. Yes, it is rather long, but it is sacrilege to skip this thing in my book. Also, it's another good reason to give up the ad revenue on this video, because the opening for this game features licensed music, and there is no way I could talk about this game without keeping the licensed music featured.
Talented, brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping, spectacular.
The track in the opening is called Fly by a band called Loudmouth, by the way, is pure a late 90s hard rock banger as you'll ever see. Also, depending on which version of the game you play, there's a different track featured in the opening of the game. In the PAL version, we get a track called Dreamer by a band called Cast. A good track, but probably the weakest of the bunch in my opinion.
Maniax, the first artificial intelligence. The enemy has already activated the time shaft. Your mission is to prevent the Alpha Core from causing historical alteration.
And in the Japanese version, we get the song Shade by the band Feeder. Now, I know some North Americans might take umbrage with this, but the Feeder opening is probably my personal favorite, although just by a little bit.
Talented, brilliant, incredible.
Also, somebody in Polyphony Digital really loves the band Feeder. They're featured in like 90% of their games. But hey, good for Feeder, get that bag, boys. Anyway, as you may have guessed, there is a plot behind all this cool blend of CGI and live action action. So in the future, humans are waging a war against a rogue AI by the name of Alpha Core. Humans want to stop Alpha Core from ever being created in the first place, so they develop the ability to time travel, but Alpha Core becomes aware of this and then gains the ability to time travel itself. So it sets up a series of time shafts to basically future-proof itself in the past so that it is guaranteed to survive. Humankind's last-ditch effort to stop this is the development of a time-traveling mech suit going by the name of Omega Boost, who's sent on a mission to travel back to 1964 and prevent the first iteration of Alpha Core from ever gaining sentience. Of course, due to a little fumbly bumbly, you end up in the future instead, fighting near the home base of Alpha Core called ETA, and that's where things kick off in the game. Look, it is as elaborate a plot as any scene in a video game, but as you can see, due to all of the live action footage shot and filmed for this game, Polyphony Digital really wasn't messing around with this thing, and as far as stories for rail shooters go, this has to be up there as one of, if not the coolest in the genre, even if a lot of it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Anyway, that's enough cutscene and story talk. Let's move on to the gameplay itself, which aims to blend traditional rail shooter gameplay with some more free-form space mech fighting to incredible effect. Omega Boost is one of those games where you look at it in motion and it can just kinda leave you dazzled. I know personally when I first seen this game, I just thought, wow, look how cool this thing looks. How on earth do you play it though? Well, as it turns out, Omega Boost is deceptively simple when you break it all down. It allows you to do a lot of flashy and cool things with relative ease, and even though it seems like a game where you can easily disorientate yourself and lose track of everything around you, that thankfully isn't really much of a problem thanks to some very clever design. Most of the fundamentals in the game get broken down for you during the game's 4 training missions, all of which should take you no longer than 5 minutes to get through. You have 2 methods of shooting, the rail shooter classic lock-on laser and an auto shot for a stream of fire. Both are actually activated using the same button, and since painting targets is automatic, you just press the button to shoot your lasers once and then keep tapping it again for an auto shot. Nice and easy. Movement, on the other hand, is really the most important aspect of Omega Boost's gameplay. Of course, you move and aim using the D-pad or analog, and can boost in any direction using a dedicated boost button, which isn't just very useful and looks cool, but it also sounds great too. Now, the secret to Omega Boost gameplay really comes down to the use of one button, the lock-on button. This button automatically turns your mech in the direction of your nearest target, and when held down, it allows you to swap from a free fly mode to a more traditional rail shooter style of movement. You will probably spend a good chunk of the game holding this button down, as it is how you'll engage in combat with most, if not all of the game's enemies, but it's such a simple and elegant way of allowing you to basically fly like crazy around the game's levels, but also never lose track of your targets. It basically enables the game to look wild and cinematic, like some sort of highly choreographed death waltz in space, but at the same time, it also means you're always completely in control, just thanks to one little button. Now, while most levels take place in more open arenas, there are a few more traditional tunnel style levels where the movement changes somewhat too. If you press the lock-on button while you're in these sections, it allows you to strafe around in a sort of 2D plane, and moving without pressing the button allows you to kind of turn and aim in full 3D. Honestly, I think it's one of those games where you kind of need to play it to really appreciate how well it's done. But whether you're in a big open area or just trapped inside a tunnel, it doesn't just look good, it plays good too. Now, unsurprisingly for a rail shooter, Omega Boost isn't the longest game out there. The game features a total of 9 main campaign levels, most of which take place in the depths of space or across various planets. Levels on average take around 5 to 10 minutes to beat, and depending on how quickly you complete it and how many enemies you kill, you'll get a rank at the end of the level. Now, this rank isn't just for your own personal satisfaction, but these ranks also give you points which level up your mech. Leveling up mostly just gives you access to additional lock-on lasers per rank, which are always nice, but early on you'll also unlock a special ability called the Viper Boost, which kinda acts like this game's smart bomb. You'll see a meter above your health bar that fills up when you take out enemies, and once it flashes blue, it can be used to unleash a sort of bouncy boost attack that is very, very powerful and should almost exclusively be used on bosses, but hey, it also looks pretty cool too, which is nice. And speaking of bosses, this game is going to throw quite a few at you per level. Don't be surprised if single stages throw multiple mini bosses at you before you even get to fight the main boss of an area, and some of these are tough too. I can't tell you how many times I've beaten a mini boss, exhaled a sigh of relief, and then put the controller down to only have the real boss come up out of the woodwork, and these main boss fights are wild. You could be fighting a ship that's simultaneously dropping bombs and orbital lasers on you from the sky, giant hulking mechanical monstrosities both in space and on the ground, and even some smaller, more high-octane battles against similarly sized mech opponents. These fights are a definite highlight, and as the game goes on, they can get very, very tough too, especially the final 2 levels of the game, which turns the difficulty level through the roof. Now, a big part of this difficulty, I would say, actually comes down to the game's lack of health items, as the only way you can heal in this game is by beating a mission, and in some cases, you may not even get all your health back, so the worse you're doing, the harder this game is gonna be. But if anything, I found it can make for some of the most heart-in-your-mouth rail shooter action that you will get during this generation. Omega Boost is tough, but it really is this kind of game at its best, and beating the last few levels is some rush, let me tell you. Of course, when all is said and done, most people will see the game's credits in just under an hour, but fret not, Omega Boost does have some additional replayability through some bonus unlockable missions. Now, the criteria for unlocking these missions is a little bit vague. You'll need to do things like beat the game on hard, beat it without continuing, kill 100% of the enemies in every level, and finish the game without using the Viper boost. All that good stuff. So clearly, it'll make you work to unlock all of these. Now, of the missions that I did unlock, I got to fight off a wave of 200 fighters and also fight a giant trippy face. So, needless to say, I was pretty happy. So I guess it's clear, I think this game is pretty rad. And yes, the gameplay is a big part of that, but really, so much of this game's cool factor comes down to its presentation. And I mean, we've already talked about the cutscenes, and I could probably go on for days about how cool some of the UI elements are. I mean, come on, this is a top tier memory card screen, let's be fair. But Omega Boost visually, in-game, is without a doubt one of the best looking PS1 games around. It's a case study for doing so much while using so little, because I mean, a lot of this game's environments are just empty space, right? I mean, hell, some of them are almost entirely black, kind of like you're fighting in the dark, but the way the game uses these little effects and background elements to create the feelings of high speed, the stars flying by, the incredible rain of bullets from some of the enemies, the sparks flying off them when you attack them. The game is a visual feast for the eyes. It doesn't need huge complex environments because Omega Boost will give you a visual treat from the action alone. Of course, having some of the coolest mech and enemy designs around also helps too. If the Macross influence wasn't already as clear as day, it probably won't come as a surprise that Macross creator Shoji Kawamori was responsible for the mech design in this game, and it's not just that the mechs look good, right? I think that's pretty clear to see, but it's the way that it moves and weaves in the sky. It's just unlike anything else on the console. I said before that this game can often feel like a choreographed death waltz in space due to how your mech weaves around the enemies, but it's really quite impressive how damn good the movement in this game looks. Omega Boost doesn't just feel good to control, an integral part of the game is the visual feedback of your control. Not even mentioning the silky smooth frame rate too. Honestly, Polyphony worked some black magic with this thing, keeping the game at a rock solid 30 FPS, but then again, I'd expect nothing less from a team who has been working on the console since the very beginning back in 1994. They're just flexing at this stage. And finally, to round out the presentation, let's talk music and sound. Now, first things first, this game's sound effects are exactly what you would want from a mech game in space. The gunfire, the boost, the communication messages, the warning sirens. Honestly, considering Polyphony's attention to detail on the Gran Turismo games, this shouldn't come as much as a surprise, but if you are one of the people who enjoy the way big robots sound, this game is gonna make you very happy. As for the music, well, we've already covered the mixture of licensed music that's included in the game. I suppose another notable example of this is the North American menu theme, which features the Static X track, Otsegolation. I love this song, by the way. They also use it during the final boss battle, which is just so good. Now, moving beyond all the licensed music, the game's original music also kind of amazing. It's got elements of techno, rock, trip hop, trance, and let me tell you, you're gonna want to turn that BGM slider up to full because it is good. Also, the sound effects are pretty loud, so I'll probably help balance it out. want to make a special mention of the Stage 3 boss fight theme called Ground in the Sky, which is one of my all-time favorite pieces of video game music. It's this almost ethereal trip-hop beat that samples Julie Andrews of all things. There is pretty much nothing else like it in a video game. Well, that was a look at Omega Boost, which truly is one of the games that really defined the PlayStation for me. It's a game that kind of flew under the radar and got some flack from critics at the time for its short length and lack of content, but in terms of pure cool factor, the gameplay, the visuals, the music, this right here is what makes this era of gaming so special. It's a game from a team of people who knew exactly how to make a good game, knew how to make the most of the hardware, and just knew exactly what kind of game they wanted to make. It's a game that appeals to some of the most niche gamers out there, people like you and me, a game for the gamers, and to this day, I still think it's one of the coolest games ever made. Few games you can look at in motion, and before you even pick up a controller, you think, damn, this shit rules. And Omega Boost is one of those games. And hey, if the gameplay doesn't get you, then the opening movie, the mech design, or the sick soundtrack probably will. It might be a hard sell to invest in a game that only lasts about an hour or so, but I can think of few games that better represent how special this era of gaming was. Truly one of the PlayStation's greatest games. Then, now, and forever. Well, I think that about does it for volume number 11. Did you have fun? I had fun. I know Cheesy had fun. Cheesy is always having fun. Look at him, how could he not? Today we got to check out a game that let us blow up crackdowns to earn points. A platformer with no problems, none whatsoever. A beat 'em up where you fight a gorilla while listening to Fatboy Slim. And finally the PlayStation's premier time-traveling mech shooter with a silly budget for live-action cutscenes. Now as always, we need to slot each game into one of 4 categories. Is the game a must-play? Is it something worth trying if you like the look of it? Is the game just kinda meh? Or is the game trash and not worth your time? Well, Volume 11's entries see Cheesy winding up in the trash pile, Black Dawn and Gekido making their way into Tri-tier, and Omega Boost rounding things out with another win for the good guys, giving the most play tier another notch on its belt. Cheesy, cheesy, cheesy. Clearly, this game isn't very good. Few games on the platform are as raw and unpolished as this one is, and normally I find rough, scrappy games like this to have an element of charm to them, and in some ways there is. I mean, this is clearly a dev experimenting with 3D for the first time, and there's certainly some effort here, and you know what? Not all of it is terrible. A lot of it is, but not all of it. Even so, it doesn't change the fact Cheesy is one of the blandest, most visually unappealing and unusual playing platformers around. Marvel at it from afar and then move on. Trust me, it's better to just leave the poor mouse alone. He's suffered enough as it is. Black Dawn, on the other hand, ended up being a bit of a surprise for me. What I initially expected to be a janky early attempt at a 3D helicopter game on the PlayStation ended up being one of the most difficult and intense flight games that I've played on the system. It's certainly not going to be a game for everybody, mind you, but Black Ops have succeeded at making a complex yet arcadey chopper game that's in many ways a throwback to the classics and also a look at what the future of flight games would become. I think if you can tolerate the difficulty curve, Black Dawn is definitely a sleeper hit on the console and absolutely worthy of your attention. Now when it comes to Gekido, I do truly think this is one of the best beat 'em ups on the console, hands down. Now you may wonder why that doesn't get it a place in the must play tier, and well, even for as good as Gekido is, it's still a bit rough around the edges in more ways than one. It's a scrappy little 3D beat 'em up that will absolutely not win over any genre naysayers with its unforgiving difficulty and unrefined combat, but if you're a beat 'em up fan, this right here is the game for you. It's got the weapons, the wacky bosses, a tidal wave, Fatboy Slim, and more content than you can probably handle. Are there better 3D beat 'em ups out there? Absolutely, but as far as the PlayStation is concerned, Gekido might just be the king. And finally, we have Omega Boost. In my opinion, pound for pound, the PlayStation's greatest rail shooter. The Saturn had Panzer Dragoons Vi, the N64 Star Fox 64, and the PlayStation has this, the only non-racing game Polyphony Digital has ever made. And with how good this turned out, it is a crying shame that they've been stuck in Gran Turismo prison ever since. Yes, it is low on content like all rail shooters, but don't let that turn you off from the tight gameplay, beautiful visuals, and outstanding soundtrack, both licensed and unlicensed. Plus, let's be real, that opening movie is good enough to make it a must play anyway. Seriously, don't let me see any of you skipping it. You've got to watch all 5 minutes. Trust me, I'll know if you did. If you've yet to try this gem, go out of your way and give it a try. You won't regret it. Now before we finish up, of course I have to give a special thanks to the wheels chosen this episode, Mako Powered Gaming. Many thanks for your contribution, and long may the streak of non-PAL only games continue. By the way, something that may be of interest to you all is Mako Powered's recent video on a PS1 game called The Divide Enemies Within, a super obscure 1996 release that I believe is the very first 3D Metroidvania. So if you like weird, ambitious PS1 games that nobody's ever heard of, and look, something tells me you might, then I highly recommend checking this video out. I'll leave a link to it in the comments below. And speaking of comments below, if any of you lovely people would like a chance to submit a game for the viewer selection in future volumes of the series, leave your picks in the comments below and I'll get it added for you ASAP. Well, that about does it for another episode of the series. A big thank you to all the Patreon members you see below for helping make these videos possible, and also a special shout out to Alan Caslin, Crimson Cyclist, Dave Nolan, Globe99, Moomatron, Moomin Biscuit, Trans Rights Are Human Rights, and Richard Kramer, who all subscribed at the Fan++ tier. I'll be back as soon as I can with some more meandering videos about video games, but until then, thank you so much for watching, take care of yourselves, and don't forget to praise the wheel. See ya!